Hearing this, Barthold immediately became furious, as he did not want to admit something like this to everyone. But before the ruler could even touch his daughter with his finger, he heard the familiar voice of the harmful demon. Kelster appeared on the square completely unnoticed by everyone else and watched everything that was happening. At the sight of the ancient deity, Selena immediately wanted to get up, but he ordered her to stay put with one hand. Since the girl was incredibly afraid of this demon, she did not dare to disobey him, although she disgraced herself in doing so. Here the emperor turned to the blonde man, asking whether the summoned one was not supposed to fulfill the wish of his master. Imagine the ruler's surprise when the deity suddenly announced that his powers could not help fight the monsters. Kelster himself calmly explained that he had the ability to restore, which was the opposite of destruction. With disdain, the ruler asked the demon what he could do if he couldn't even deal with the monsters. The deity said that he could give a person power, and the heroine immediately latched onto this and wanted to get it. Suddenly, the guy appeared in front of the girl and asked what abilities she would like to receive from him for herself. Only now did Rudis realize that they had ended up in some strange place where nothing could be seen. Kelster explained that he let the lady into his space so that they could talk to each other normally. The demon explained that the miss might get into trouble if people found out about the two deities summoned to her, and she shuddered. After which, the deity once again asked the girl to name the power that she wanted to receive from him. He extended his hand in a pleading gesture, thereby urging the lady to make a decision regarding obtaining abilities. But it was hard for the heroine to answer such a question right away, because for most of her life, she wanted nothing. And even at that moment, the princess did not understand what exactly the meaning of her life was, because she could not find a goal. However, Miss remembered the joy that people felt when she was able to save them from being infected by monsters. So Rudy said that she would like to save the inhabitants of the empire from the terrible threat with her own hands. In response, Kelster gave the girl the same sly grin and said that he would do as she asked. He lightly touched the heroine's neck with one finger, and the lady suddenly noticed a glow from the magic circle on her neck. Not really understanding what was happening, the miss was distracted, when suddenly the demon suddenly approached and gently kissed her on the neck. After which, before Rudis had time to say anything, Kelster also quickly stepped back and said that everything was ready. Although the princess still did not fully understand what was happening, she did not find the strength to ask for more details. As soon as the girl blinked, she suddenly found herself back in the imperial square. Although the heroine herself believed that she had done nothing wrong, the lady suddenly noticed strange looks from the outside. Even the emperor himself, for some reason, stopped being indignant and stared at his unloved daughter with his mouth open. The princess looked around in confusion, because she could not understand what people were looking at so fearfully. Suddenly, turning around, the lady realized that behind her was Levane, clearly in a bad mood. Smiling sweetly at his old acquaintance, Kelster sarcastically noted that this human appearance suited him. But the first summoned ancient demon had no intention of joking at this moment, so he clenched his teeth and ordered them to be silent. However, the blonde was not at all scared, since he already knew what a bad character his friend had. Specially provoking the dark-haired guy, the second demon approached the girl and lightly hugged her by the shoulders. At this, Levane's eyes flashed with anger, and he instantly removed the deity's hands from the lady who had summoned them. Despite the first deity squeezing his hand painfully, Kelster was able to keep a confident smile on his face. To protect himself, the demon released his black smoke, and the people around him immediately began to run away in panic. When the blonde asked why Levane was so eager to take everything for himself, the deity's eyes glowed even brighter with rage. Rudis, who was watching from the sidelines, couldn't believe that her assistant was so angry. At that moment, the second deity looked closely at his acquaintance and began to ask some question. But before he could finish the sentence, Levane squeezed his hand until it bled, after which he finally let go. Still in the same gloomy mood, the guy approached his mistress, who did not know what to expect from him. The ancient creature calmly extended his hand to the lady, while she looked straight at him in confusion. Once again, in the guy's entire behavior, Miss saw a concern for her and her well-being that came from nowhere. But, just like last time, the princess still accepted the demon's hand, although she did not know what might follow. Levane gently placed the girl's hand on his cheek and whispered pleadingly that she would agree to go with him. As a result, the heroine pressed her whole body against the deity and nodded briefly, accepting his offer, whatever it meant. When the emperor's daughter opened her eyes, there was absolute white emptiness around her, which frightened her. The girl immediately began to look around in search of an assistant and call him by name so that he would come. Suddenly, right in the middle of this white space, Miss saw a box that was hanging in the air by itself. Rudy slowly began to approach her, not knowing exactly how safe this unknown object was for her. Curiosity was eating the lady up from the inside, so she carefully reached out her hand to the box to open it. But before the girl had time to touch the thing, Levane suddenly called out to her from behind, saying that he was there. Forgetting about the box, the princess turned around and asked what was happening around and where they were now. Imagine the heroine's surprise when the demon calmly replied that he lives in this place when he is not in the mistress's world. This space vaguely resembled Kelster's world, but in terms of atmosphere, it was completely opposite to it. Rudy's decided to unconditionally believe everything the guy was saying to her for now, since she didn't understand anything. Suddenly, the demon began to ask for forgiveness for leaving the miss alone when she was confused and lonely. After which the deity directly asked whether Kelster had really managed to grant some power to the first princess. The lady asked anxiously if she shouldn't have received these abilities, since now someone else would die. But the deity reassured the girl, saying that beings like him never deceive, so she need not worry. This made the princess even more confused, as she did not understand why she was not allowed to receive power from Kelster. An unpleasant suspicion arose in the girl's chest, but she restrained herself and did not voice anything for now. Unexpectedly, Levane said that he did not want the lady to use the services of other ancient deities. When Rudy's asked for an explanation, the guy with a sad face said that he would like to do everything for the girl himself. Right now, the princess seemed to him like a beautiful butterfly, imprisoned in a cage because of a cruel emperor. But the heroine had wanted love from her loved ones all her life, and now she decided never to trust anyone again. So she couldn't understand why the demon was trying so hard to help her, and she nervously clenched her fingers, grabbing her clothes. Suddenly, Levane said that he knew that he was taking on too much and was being brazen towards the lady. Rudy's was incredibly surprised when the guy suddenly asked her for forgiveness for all his actions. Trembling all over from an excess of emotions, the princess nevertheless decided to ask just one question to the ancient creature. She said that she had studied many documents, but still had not found out how long demons could stay in this world. So now the lady was worried about whether her assistant would leave her if she made her last wish to him. It was painful for Levane himself to answer this question, but he tried to speak as calmly and restrainedly as possible. But the girl's eyes widened in horror when the guy said that he existed only to carry out her orders. Despite the fact that at that moment they were no more than a meter apart, the lady felt as if she was standing very far from the deity. At this moment, in his office, Bartold was indignant about the fact that the summoned creatures obeyed only Rudy's. He noticed too late that a servant had come to him with a report, who first passed everything on to the Duke. After which the man already told that the first daughter had returned to the Arctices and was planning to leave for Geheim tomorrow. Although the ruler knew that the city needed help, he was against the girl going there alone. For this reason, His Majesty demanded that Selena be brought to him immediately, and that she too be prepared for the journey. The heroine learned about this decision only that evening, and was very surprised by her father's latest cruelty. The girl did not quite understand why Bartold decided this, because her sister could not control the ancient deity. To this, Seraphis said that the ruler had informed everyone that Selena was under the control of the summoned demon, and that she too would help. Rudis guessed that the emperor wanted to divide the gains from the journey between his two daughters. Since the Sir had no more information, he apologized for the late intrusion and left. Left alone, the princess only thought even more deeply about how exactly this trip of hers would go. Although the lady was sure that Kelster had indeed given her some powers, she could not use them yet. Suddenly, distracting Miss from her heavy thoughts, Levane unexpectedly materialized in front of the girl. He crossed his arms over his chest and confidently stated that the second demon would definitely not go with them. Rudis asked why, and the boy explained that the deity had fulfilled her wish and now could not freely appear in this world. But what saddened the lady most was that Kelster was to disappear a few months later. She immediately thought that the same thing would happen to Levane, and the demon guessed why the lady was sad. He approached her and wanted to stroke her head, but the girl suddenly closed her eyes as if about to be struck. The deity took a step back in surprise and asked if Rudis did not want him to approach her. But in response, the heroine only turned away, since she herself did not understand exactly what emotions were tearing her soul apart right now. The princess felt only sadness and sorrow at the thought that Levane would soon leave her, and therefore did not want to get closer. After a few days of travel, Selena, who had also gone, looked in horror at the red sky around her. The sky remained that color because Geheim was in the final stage of turning people into monsters. However, the heroine herself was much more concerned about what kind of relationship she currently had with Levane. As she was getting down from the carriage, the guy extended his hand to her, but the lady accepted the help of a completely different person. As a result, the demon turned away sadly. Although he did not say a word to the lady, despite his condition, Rudy's herself was very sad about everything that was happening, but she didn't yet know what the right thing to do was. A few days ago, when the demon asked about getting closer to her, the girl was so scared that she started shaking. As a result, the deity very quickly came to the conclusion that it would be better for him to have as little contact with the lady as possible at the moment. The princess was so deep in her thoughts that she was very frightened when she heard the voices of the guards. It turned out that the knights were arguing with each other because the emperor had sent too small a detachment to help the city. Saintess desperately tried to calm the angry captain, but the guy still wasn't doing a very good job. Suddenly, one of the scouts, who was incredibly scared, ran straight to the squad, screaming about a mutated resident. Because of this, the guard was distracted from the air of Arctis, since he now urgently needed to evacuate people. The emperor's first daughter was greatly frightened when she heard a man approaching them, almost swallowed by a monster. Obeying their desire to live, people immediately ran away from the epicenter of danger, helping each other. Selena didn't immediately understand what was happening, so she looked around in confusion, trying to find an answer. When the girl saw an incomprehensible and huge silhouette ahead, she froze in place out of fear of it. The residents who did not manage to escape begged for help, but were already partially captured by the monster and could not escape. And the creature itself slowly and lazily rose above those around it, continuing to search for its next victims. At the very top of the monster, the head of a little girl was visible, from whose eyes bloody tears constantly flowed. Selena could not bear the horrible sight and began to vomit, while the soldiers were preparing to attack. But before the knights had time to get even a meter closer to the monster, some unfamiliar woman jumped out in front of them. The captain asked her to get out of the way, but she tearfully begged the guards not to touch her daughter, who had become a monster. The second princess was so shocked by this that she almost stopped breathing for a while. Even Rudy's felt uneasy from this information, although the girl already understood how the monster ritual worked. Realizing that the woman would not move out of the way, the soldiers said they would open fire on her too, although this made no difference. Suddenly, to the heroine's great horror, the monster in the form of a girl plaintively called out to her mother, although she could not help him. This convinced the resident even more that her daughter was still alive, which is why she went straight to her. The captain guessed that in a little while, the monster would start killing everyone in a row, so he ordered the soldiers to get ready. Suddenly, despite the fact that it was very dangerous, the first princess walked straight towards the mutated man in front of her. Saintess noticed too late that Rudy's had left the protection and wanted to run after her to stop her. But then, a demon's hand fell on the guy's shoulder, saying that everything was in perfect order and they didn't have to interfere. But the heir of the Arctis family could not so quickly and easily believe what the deity told him. Levain never thought that any person would reproach him for not helping his mistress enough. These words caused the demon to smile sincerely, after which he explained that he knew better than anyone what was going on. The whole point was that the heroine finally felt in herself those abilities that Kelster had recently given her. Although the lady herself did not understand how, she knew in which direction she needed to move her fingers to activate her powers. So, literally in a few seconds, the girl achieved something that surprised everyone around her. The woman also noticed that an incomprehensible glow had appeared around the princess, and once again asked not to touch her daughter. To this, Rudy's replied that she only wanted to help, and she put all her strength into saving the girl. The magic immediately affected the child, as the baby began to cry even louder, clearly resisting inside. However, the emperor's daughter persistently healed the girl, despite the fact that it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to do so. The monster retained its shape for some time, and then suddenly began to glow with the same blue light. Literally a few seconds later, a bright flash of magical light illuminated the space around for many kilometers. While all the villagers and soldiers silently watched what was happening, the girl completely transformed back into a human. The happy mother immediately picked up her beloved daughter in her arms and wrapped her up so that she wouldn't freeze without clothes. Despite the victory, the lady was not particularly happy, as she was incredibly exhausted, although she was able to help the child. For some time after Rudy's magic took effect, the soldiers stood silently and did not move due to their great surprise. Eventually, someone in the crowd shouted that a miracle had happened, and everyone else immediately picked up on the information. Then a man in aristocratic attire ran into the ranks of soldiers and asked where the mutated resident was. It turned out to be Duke Arctis, who had arrived in the city because he had learned that the situation there was very dangerous. A little later, the old man was told on the map what the balance of power really was, which was in favor of the people. Duke Duelist didn't expect that the ancient deity's abilities were so powerful and effective against monsters. Rudis, in response to all his questions, calmly replied that she would definitely be able to save Geheim and other infected cities. Seraphis confirmed the lady's words, saying that he had seen with his own eyes how useful the summoned demon's abilities were. However, Arctis reminded everyone gathered that the ritual of the monsters had already begun, and the number of people was decreasing. He asked if the princess could heal several hundred people, and she responded with anxious silence. In fact, the heroine did not know whether she would be able to cure at least one more person, despite the fact that she successfully helped the girl. But then, Rudis remembered how all the residents suffered because of the infection, so she confidently declared that she would succeed. Of course, Miss was going to act not only with the help of her own powers, because she still had Levane. Duelist was amazed when he saw how easily the demon dealt with those monsters that could no longer be helped. No matter how much the old man watched the princess and the deity, he could not get used to the power they possessed. Here, on the brickwork of one of the streets, the emperor's daughter noticed some strange red liquid. She immediately remembered that she had seen something similar somewhere, although she had never been in such an infected city before. A picture of her sister after the ritual popped into the heroine's head, sitting in exactly the same liquid in color and texture. But then Seraphis called out to Rudis and asked if she was okay, so the girl had to put these thoughts aside. In order not to accidentally get hurt on the way, the first princess tried to follow the deity who would protect her. At the same time, the heroine still couldn't get the recent thought about the pools of blood on the floor out of her head. The girl did not understand why the traces of the monsters left exactly the same liquids as the summoned deities. But right now, Miss had to be busy destroying monsters, so she didn't have time to think properly. The squad climbed the tallest building in the city to survey the surrounding area and draw a conclusion about where to start. Seraphis was the first to look down, and was so frightened that for some time he could not describe to anyone what he saw there. The thing was that everything down there was filled with monsters of varying strength and appearance, who were constantly making noise and looking for people. There were so many of them that in some places it became unclear where one monster began and another ended. The guy remembered that the princess became ill after treating just one girl, and there were so many monsters here. But the heroine herself did not even think for a second about giving up, and once again stated that she would try to help. When the Sir called out to the lady in protest, she turned and explained that those people still had to be rescued somehow. Then the heir Arctis turned to Levane with a request that he immediately dissuade the Miss from her plan. The demon told the princess that she would not be able to avoid pain if she began to heal those people, and Rudis became visibly upset. However, the deity then told the girl to do what she thought was necessary and right. Seraphis was greatly alarmed when he realized that Levane had supported the lady's plan to try to save all the monsters below. But the ancient creature suddenly promised that he would not let the worst happen to the lady, no matter what happened. Rudis thanked her assistant and activated her powers to begin spreading her healing to the monsters. As a result of the magic, after just a few seconds, some of the monsters were able to become human again. But the heroine herself quickly realized that even all her strength would not be enough to help everyone. Sir Arctis noticed that the princess was beginning to overexert herself and shouted at her to stop immediately. But Miss was no longer listening to anyone around her, as she was concentrating on healing people. Rudis even began to draw strength from all the resources of her own body, causing the magic to color her all white. Due to the fact that the lady released a huge flow of her energy, she eventually could not stand it and began to lose consciousness. The heroine didn't even notice how she suddenly couldn't stay on her feet, but her friends immediately caught her and carefully laid her down. The last thing Rudy saw before she finally lost consciousness were the worried faces of the Arctis family. Falling deep into her subconscious, the princess felt as if her entire body was bound by sharp thorns. The emperor's daughter could not even move from her place, since her hands and feet were tightly and painfully tied. The girl lay motionless and wondered if all this was really the price to pay for saving a huge number of people. In her thoughts, the lady begged someone to give her just one sip of water, as she was madly thirsty. Only after a few seconds did the miss realize that she was actually quenching her thirst thanks to someone's caring hands. After she had drunk her fill, these same hands carefully laid the princess down on the bed so that she would be comfortable. Opening her eyes, Rudy saw Levane, whom she had initially suspected of being so caring, right in front of her. Noticing that the lady had woken up, the guy immediately moved away from her, which immediately caused bewilderment in the emperor's daughter. The demon suddenly explained that he would not approach the girl until she herself wanted it and told him. The first princess didn't expect that the deity still felt that she was uncomfortable being around him. However, the lady did not sort things out between them, but instead asked the guy to bring her more water. But as soon as Rudis accidentally touched the demon's fingers, a magic circle immediately appeared around them. Due to the sudden flare-up of heat, Miss couldn't resist and accidentally knocked over a glass of cool water onto Levain. Although the guy himself did not show any emotion, the lady was incredibly scared and cowered in a defensive pose, all because unpleasant memories of her worthlessness and uselessness immediately flashed in the princess's head. His Majesty constantly shouted angrily and asked her why she couldn't do anything properly. Even Selena didn't miss a single opportunity to tease her clumsy and unloved older sister. Because of all these terrible memories, the girl even had a panic attack for a moment. But then, Levain gently touched the lady's face and in a soothing voice asked her not to worry about anything. The princess woke up and realized that she had completely accidentally stopped monitoring her own behavior. Since she felt awkward, she asked the demon to forget about everything, and he said that the miss could always rely on him. But in response, the emperor's daughter sadly declared that she could not rely on anyone other than herself. Despite all the pain in his soul, the demon still asked why the girl could not finally trust him. To this, Rudis, with a hint of madness in her eyes, said that she would still be alone when the deity left her. Only now did Levain realize that the lady was afraid to believe him because she didn't want to feel the pain after their separation. He reminded her that he would leave only when he fulfilled her wish, but the princess already knew about all this. She admitted that she fears abandonment more than anything else, so she doesn't want to receive kindness from the ancient deity. The boy had no idea that his mistress's sadness and pain were so deep that they touched even him with just words. Unable to bear this, the demon ran out of the room before the girl could say anything else to him. As much as the princess wanted to end this dialogue, she realized that now was not the best time for such discussions. At this moment, Selena was still sitting on the street, completely alone, as she did not dare to go anywhere alone. The girl was incredibly offended by the fact that no one paid any attention to her, wanting to talk only to Rudis. And even the older sister left at some point, citing an urgent matter, which only angered the second princess even more. The blonde lady couldn't remember at what exact moment the older one became so confident and self-willed. Suddenly, a memory of the moment when she was in the ritual room flashed in Selena's mind. Only now did the girl realize that there was someone else there besides her, but she couldn't remember exactly the person's face. All the princess could remember was the soft, soothing strokes on her back during that terrible moment for her. That night, the heroine couldn't sleep once again, so she decided to take a walk to get at least a little rest. The girl remembered how Levain's lips had pressed together painfully as he tried to explain to her what the matter was. However, the lady had long ago noticed that the guy did not even deny the fact that he would leave her at one point. Only now, having thought over everything not want her to lose her mind because of the cruel truth about the past. The princess was still sad that she had not received any answers to anything, but Miss decided not to insist for now. The next morning, Count Abbott was the first to inform the emperor that the detachment with his daughters had dealt with the next monsters. The man smiled slyly and immediately began to convince everyone that all this was possible only thanks to the work of the beautiful Selena. The guy didn't like these words at all, but he didn't dare to object to His Majesty in this situation. Instead, he hinted that he had another piece of news, and Barthold demanded that he tell it quickly, as he was burning with curiosity. The Count then reported that Princess Rudis had saved more people thanks to her new and as yet unknown power. Barthold became very angry when he heard that the girl had somehow turned all the infected monsters back into humans. A little later, having finished his report, Abbott left His Majesty's office in a not very good mood. The guy was upset that the emperor was clearly not happy with the results of his daughter's last trip to the infected city. Unlike Vigneault, Geheim was a major trading city, so the number of people who respected Rudis increased greatly. The Count understood perfectly well that at this rate the princess would soon receive support with which she would overcome even the emperor himself. Initially, there were no problems with the conservative personality of the ruler, but then suddenly monsters appeared. Due to his unwillingness to spend his own resources to help the cities, Barthold gradually led the empire to collapse. Even when Vigneault and Geheim reached the critical point, the emperor only tried to continue to fill his treasury. But at that time, the Duchy of Arctis was constantly sacrificing its people in order to somehow save the state from infection. So Abbott was sure that Barthold was actually a vile coward, and therefore the empire could only collapse with him. The guy considered the first princess to be a different matter, as she sincerely wanted to help the cities that were under the yoke of monsters. The Count was very surprised when the lady asked her father if he was really so obviously chasing money and power, rather than trying to help people. At this moment, the ruler was also in deep thought, because he did not understand when everything in his life had gone so badly. Barthold struggled to find an answer for himself, because he did not want to lose the money, status, and power he had acquired so easily. He remembered the words of the unknown priestess, who told him that Lavaine was an inferior ancient deity. Suddenly, the man realized that it was precisely because of this lie that he had made a mistake, so much so that he jumped up in his seat from emotion. The emperor demanded that the secretary immediately bring a list of all the priestesses who visited the imperial family. Lady Ivana, who had sent her assistant not long ago to lie to the ruler, found out about this quite quickly. Giselle did not quite understand what her mistress's plans and goals were, since in the servants' eyes, their situation was only getting worse. The girl asked the aristocrat if the imperial family's influence was not growing faster and faster right now. Instead of answering, the woman touched her fingertip to her mug of tea, which had been standing on the edge of the table for a long time. She pushed the cup, spilling the tea, and said that the higher Rudis climbed, the more painful her fall would be. And Ivana was going to make sure that after that fall, there were no traces left indicating her actions. Giselle reminded that the lady could have suffered at least because of the ruler's search for the priestess who told him a lie. But Esther, despite all the worries of her assistant, was not at all worried about her possibly disastrous future. She was sure that Barthold would give her life himself, so she smiled sarcastically when the ruler actually came to her. Although His Majesty was unhappy that he had to ask for help, he saw no other way out. Literally the next morning, the Arctis family's butler reported that the emperor was holding an immediate meeting. He explained that the ruler wanted to choose the next destination, although the lady was not yet ready to go anywhere. Rudis thought that the more successful her travels were, the more Barthold would begin to hinder them, but this did not happen. The miss asked the old man if there was anything strange in her father's behavior, and he admitted that he had indeed noticed something. It turned out that the meeting was to take place in the palace by the lake, which ultimately surprised even Seriphus, who knew a lot about the ruler. The heroine realized with concern that Barthold was probably planning something else against her, but she didn't yet know what exactly. Sir Arctis was amazed at how calmly the girl accepted the fact that her own father was going against her. He decided to support the lady and reminded her that he would be there no matter what happened, so that they would definitely cope with everything together. The butler also supported the young lady, and she smiled gratefully at her friends, pretending that she felt better. But in reality, Rudis couldn't help but worry, but she tried not to show her true face because they were already at the meeting. However, Seriphus still noticed the miss's worries, which he asked her about, but the princess did not share her emotions. The heroine understood that even if she told someone about her worries, it would not make her feel any better. The girl was also worried because when she ran away from the palace, it was a cold winter, and everyone was wearing warm and thick clothes. It is thanks to this that, until now, the emperor's daughter has managed to hide the fact that she could not walk normally. But before Rudy's had time to think about what would happen if someone found out about her leg, a servant announced His Majesty's arrival at the meeting. This time, the man even took his youngest daughter with him, which immediately surprised everyone around him. It was clear from Selina's face that she was not at all happy with everything that was happening and would like to return to her room. The first princess could not even guess what this appearance of her sister meant, who was shaking with fear. However, under the surprised looks of the others, Bartold took his seat and announced the start of their urgent meeting. The aristocrats immediately began to suggest as the next point one of the rich cities, which required almost no assistance. One after another, the men assured that unrest had already begun in Karta because they had not received any help. But the heroine still stated with absolute confidence that she was against going to Karta to provide them with her help. The dukes immediately stated that the last contact with the city was a month ago, so they really needed help. But when the lady reported that the situation in the map had changed, people immediately fell silent in surprise, since they did not know about it. The princess guessed that the aristocrats hardly followed the news, leaving everything to the Duchy of Arctis to deal with. So Serapis announced that all the monsters had now fled from the map, which greatly surprised all the nobles present. One of the dukes said that the Sir's words sounded as if the monsters were intelligent and acted in a coordinated manner. To this, the heir of the Arctis family confidently reported that the tactical skills of the monsters were many times greater than those of humans. This information frightened the aristocrats so much that they stood frozen in shock, not knowing what to say next. Unexpectedly, Count Abbot took the floor and said that it was unlikely that all the monsters had simply disappeared from the cities close to the center. Serapis confirmed the boy's words and said that most of the monsters had now arrived in a city called Ephedor. Hearing this, Rudis knew it was time for her to act, so she stood up in front of everyone present and suggested going to this city. At the same time, the heroine was actually very worried about the fact that disputes and obstacles from her father could arise again. But the man surprisingly calmly withstood the gaze of his unloved daughter, as if he had absolutely no bad intentions. The emperor's personal secretary immediately reported excitedly that it was impossible to send a detachment there because of Ephedor's enormous power. But, to the assistant's great surprise, the ruler suddenly grinned maliciously and allowed his daughter to go on this trip. Rudis immediately became very tense, since such behavior was not at all typical of her father, who always clung to power. She knew that with the support of the people of Ephedor, she could gain a huge advantage over the ruler. The fact that the man agreed so easily told the princess that he had some good plan to deal with her. Judging by her father's smirk, the lady realized that he had come up with something so powerful that he was now incredibly confident in himself. The whole point was that just yesterday, His Majesty came to Lady Esther to get at least some help from her. Ivana showed with her whole appearance that she knew perfectly well about the possible arrival of the emperor to her because of his shaky power. The woman explained that it was to her own advantage to act in order to raise Princess Selina up again. But Bartold didn't believe the aristocrat's words, since she hadn't taken any action all this time. She recalled that, even despite the presence of two ancient deities at once, neither of them obeyed either Selina or him. In response to this, Esther grinned slyly and said that if they came to an agreement with the second demon, then Rudis would not be needed. The emperor was very surprised by these words of the woman and asked if she really knew how to control the summoned deity. He had received an answer to his question, and so now he was talking completely calmly with his daughter, who was surprised by his calmness. The heroine realized that even if there was some kind of setup on her father's part, she had no right to cancel the trip to Ephedor. So the lady declared that the journey would take place, to which the ruler only smiled wider and supported the lady in everything. All because Esther told the man about Lavaine's only weakness, which no one but them knew about. With a smile, Ivana said that the demon can only use its power when it receives a direct order from the mistress. So if Rudis was silent, then the ancient deity could not begin to act on its own, even if it wanted to. This nuance was extremely beneficial to Barthold, so he decided to make sure to use it for his own purposes as soon as possible. As soon as the meeting was over, the secretary ran to his master, as he did not understand why he had approved everything. The first princess still watched her father with suspicion, but he behaved completely naturally and did nothing. Suddenly, the girl heard her sister calling her very loudly, for some reason standing in the very center of the corridor. The second daughter suggested talking, but the lady immediately replied that she did not believe that they had topics for dialogue. However, Selena screamed in panic that this concerned her father, so her older sister simply had to listen to her. Hearing this, Rudis immediately became interested, so she politely asked Saintess to wait for her outside for a while. Even after the guy left, the blonde lady continued to collect her thoughts for a few more seconds without saying anything. The emperor's unloved daughter saw how nervous the miss in front of her was, but she did not understand the reason for this. Suddenly, Selena confessed that recently her father raised his hand against her for the first time, and this news really scared the heroine. In complete shock, the first princess grabbed her younger sister by the shoulders and asked again if she had understood everything correctly. In response, the second daughter only nodded sadly, and Rudis tried to find traces of fresh beatings on her, but so far, she saw nothing. Suddenly, Selena surprised the lady even more, as she admitted that she knew why Barthold so easily agreed to go to Ephodor. A little later, when they sat down to drink tea for the sake of dialogue, the lady checked that her reflection in the cup looked as calm as possible. Only after this did the first princess ask the second to tell her everything that she had somehow become aware of. The second princess was sad to begin her story, but she understood that she had invited him to talk, so there was no other choice. The girl reported that yesterday, her father threw various objects at his daughter in anger because he was extremely unhappy with her. First of all, Barthold didn't like the fact that the lady couldn't do the same as his unloved first daughter. The man lost his temper so much that he was ready to completely lose it on the girl he had been protecting his entire life. After hearing all this, Rudis was horrified because at first the emperor had mocked her in the same way, and now he had moved on to his younger sister. At this point, Selena burst into tears, admitting that she had no idea what to do in such a difficult situation. The first thing the heroine did was suggest that the lady leave the imperial palace, but the blonde immediately rejected this idea. More than anything in the world, the girl was afraid of losing everything that her father had once given her, despite his current cruel treatment of her. The second daughter said that if she left, she would have absolutely nothing because she was not like her older sister. The lady had lived her entire life in comfort, wealth, and coziness, so she was not ready to give up everything she had acquired at once. With a crazy smile, Selena asked Rudis how she could survive without His Majesty's money and connections if she didn't know how to do anything. The heroine did not expect that her younger sister had lost so much self-respect and was ready to endure beatings for the sake of money. And the girl suddenly cried out, was it good for the first princess now that they had completely accidentally changed places? Rudis could not stand such an unfair accusation and asked the girl to immediately stop talking to her like that. Suddenly, everything around began to blur before the young lady's eyes, which she absolutely could not expect. The heroine immediately fell to the floor, as she could not resist the effect of this incomprehensible state on her mind. In front of her, the lady could barely make out Selena's face, who was smiling because she had deliberately gotten her sister drunk. As a result, the first princess did not even have time to ask the second one anything before she completely lost consciousness because of the drink. The only thing the heroine managed to hear was the voice of Lady Ivana, who openly and cruelly mocked her. At this point, the second princess anxiously asked if the drink was really just a sleeping pill for the miss. The girl shared her thoughts about how she was no longer sure of the correctness of her actions, although she had listened to her father. To this, Esther asked why Selena was even interested in Rudis's condition, and whether she had poured all the medicine into the lady's tea. The emperor's favorite daughter immediately declared that she did not care at all about the fate of her older sister, and she had definitely done everything as needed. Mrs. only worry was that if the Arctis family found out about their plan, it could cause huge problems. But the woman replied with a smile that Selena was simply following her father's instructions, which meant that she herself was not at all to blame. Clutching the bottle of medicine behind her back, of which there was still some left inside, the girl agreed with the maid's words. Several hours later, the heroine managed to come to her senses with great difficulty, although it was still difficult for her to even move. Suddenly, the young lady remembered what exactly happened before she ended up helplessly losing consciousness. But before the lady could do anything, she heard the displeased voice of the emperor, who did not understand why she had already woken up. The man asked with disdain whether the sleeping pills had not been enough, since his daughter had to sleep until the very end of the case. The first princess screamed at the ruler with displeasure and tried to jump out of bed to run away from him. However, as soon as Rudis got to her feet, she immediately lost her balance and fell down, since she couldn't hold on at all. Moreover, the girl's entire body was once again pierced by a terrible pain, which she could not cope with at all, no matter what she did. But what scared the princess most was the fact that for some reason she couldn't feel her legs at all at that moment. Unexpectedly for the heroine, Barthold slowly approached her and said that the second medicine had not yet fully worked. Because of the deafening pain, the lady could barely understand that her father was saying that they had slipped her more than just a sleeping pill. Then the ruler said that the miss would no longer be able to move her legs, causing Rudis to freeze in place in complete shock and horror. Leaning towards the girl, Barthold mockingly whispered that if she tried, she would crawl to Ephodor. The heroine was so shocked by her own father's treachery that for some time she could not say anything. Barthold said that he would let his unloved daughter go as soon as the medicine took effect, but for now, she just needed to sleep. With all her might, the lady tried to call Lavaine to her aid, as she needed him now more than ever before. But, smiling devilishly, His Majesty said that he could not allow the appearance of an ancient deity here. He explained that since the girl did not know where exactly they were, the demon would never be able to find her in this room. So Barthold calmly forced Rudis to drink the rest of the medicine, although the miss desperately continued to resist it. According to the ruler's plan, the princess was to accidentally fall into the lake, from where she would be rescued too late. Having fallen to the floor, the heroine tried to understand why there were always failures and hardships around her. For the lady, everything that was happening was already so unbearable that she did not want to feel anything or think about anything anymore. Before leaving, the emperor looked back at the lady and asked her not to hate him too much, because she herself did not obey him. But the man was unable to finish speaking, because he discovered that something had changed in the room, although he had done nothing. Somehow, everything around turned blood red, which made His Majesty incredibly scared. In a panic, Barthold asked his daughter if she had somehow managed to summon her powerful ancient deity. But right now, the girl's eyes remained so lifeless that she didn't even understand what exactly her father was telling her. The lady saw that the man was suffering from the darkness around him, but she was confident that it was he who let her in here, and not she. The heroine was incredibly tired of the emperor asking for mercy every time his situation became hopeless. But Rudis no longer wanted to be inside this vicious and unpleasant cycle of relationships. Closing her eyes, Miss realized that she did not want anything like this to ever happen again in her life. Suddenly, the heroine realized that she would feel calmer if she killed her father, and immediately, a crazy smile appeared on her face. At this moment, Saintess, who was still standing near the door to the duchy, could hardly think of anything due to his clouded mind. Suddenly, the boy finally woke up, realizing that someone had spread the smell of a sleeping pill in the air, which had affected him. The guy was very interested in who exactly did this, but he was much more afraid for the princess, whom he left all alone. Running into the room where the sisters were talking, the Sir found absolutely no one there, which made him very scared. Arctis was just beginning to blame himself for losing his vigilance when he suddenly heard footsteps behind him and turned around. Imagine the guy's surprise when he saw a girl behind him, who, in theory, shouldn't have been in this place. Selena, although her whole body was trembling, said that the heir had misunderstood everything and asked him to listen to her. Although the lady could not even guarantee her own safety, she still decided to tell where Rudis was. But it so happened that Saintess, due to emotional stress, was unable to listen to the lady to the end as he became angry. As a result, literally within a few dozen minutes, the guy was already near the extension where the lady was being held. Unexpectedly for himself, Saintess suddenly heard a menacing voice behind him, which demanded that he step aside. It turned out to be Lavaine, who was currently so angry that he couldn't have a constructive conversation with anyone at all. Sir did not expect that the demon would be so serious that he would even pass by him, although he was the one looking for the lady. Without saying a word, the ancient deity confidently entered the extension and opened the doors to the desired room, quickly finding it. The guys did not expect at all that they would see the emperor lying inside and begging for mercy, who did not even notice them. Saintess ran up to the ruler with alarm, although he did not find a single wound on him, so he could not understand the reasons for such behavior. Since Barthold still hadn't answered where the first princess was, Lavaine now turned to him more cruelly. The demon grabbed the man by the neck and lifted him easily into the air, causing him pain as he tried to get an answer. Herr Arctis did not expect that His Majesty would suddenly begin to beg him for help, since he personally could not resist the deity. And the summoned guy himself suddenly declared angrily that the emperor only believed in what he personally saw, which is why he was very blind. He explained that he showed mercy to the man only because Rudis had initially requested it. Only now Lavaine could barely speak normally, because he was incredibly angry at the annoying father of the lady. He threw the ruler to the floor to look down on him and declared that the man would never understand anything anyway. Here, the demon's attention was drawn to Seriphus, who reminded him that Rudis was nowhere to be found, while she definitely should have been here. In response, the guy briefly said that he would definitely bring her, since he had already guessed where exactly the lady could be. The girl herself, completely unaware of what was happening around her, was slowly drifting in some kind of bloody liquid. She didn't move at all, because she was much more comfortable now being in complete prostration. The girl remembered that all this time, she had not touched the ruler only because she hoped for his changes. Rudis had no desire to live at all, while being wrapped in a thirst for revenge against her own cruel father. For the heroine personally, this kind of behavior meant liberation from the shackles of the past when she felt sad and bad. For this reason, the princess tried her best to do everything to be completely different from the emperor. But no matter how the lady tried to deny it, she was still the culprit of the deaths, as the demon told her. So the heroine realized that her hands had been covered in blood for a long time, no matter how much she wanted things to be a little different. What hurt Rudis the most was that she would not be able to achieve happiness, since she was not much different from her father. While the mist was still lying in the bloody substance, she felt like just a small and unnecessary person in the crowd. Only now did the princess realize that she had been pathetic and weak from the start, so a good ending was not for her. Suddenly, the lady heard a familiar voice calling her with all its might, causing the emperor's daughter to even wake up. Tears began to flow from her eyes when the girl's eyes fell on the hand of the ancient deity who had unexpectedly found her. Even though Rudis didn't want to rely on anyone else, she still hugged the guy who came to her tightly. When the princess finally woke up from her obsession, she asked, somewhat embarrassed, what had happened. Lavaine explained that he had captured the lady's awakened consciousness and dragged her into his space to protect her. The girl didn't like the fact that the guy was clearly not telling her something once again, even though he saved her. The demon noticed that there was an awkward pause between them, and so he asked why the princess did not ask any more questions. To this, the emperor's daughter sadly said that the deity would not answer her anyway, so there was no point in asking. But what hurt the most for the heroine was that the sensitivity in her legs did not even think of returning even after some time. Suddenly, the lady could not bear it any longer and began to cry, asking the assistant why he had come to her aid so late. Miss was also tormented by the question of why the guy did not leave her in that darkness, because she finally had a desire for revenge. But now that she had been saved once again, Rudis couldn't just up and abandon the ancient deity. However, the princess could no longer walk, which she told the guy, and his face immediately darkened. Imagine the heroine's surprise when the demon suddenly said that he could restore her legs to their original health. The deity explained that he knew of only one way to turn back time for a short moment. Rudis asked to do it immediately, but the guy admitted that they would have to pay a certain price. The girl didn't expect the demon to say something like that, although she had already heard that one had to pay for exceeding one's powers. But she wanted her legs back, so she asked what needed to be done, and Lavaine reluctantly admitted that they needed to touch. The princess had already come up with anything, but not such a trifle as a simple touch to each other. The heroine clenched her hands tightly, because she could not believe that the price of fulfilling her desire was tactile contact. Rudis wasn't sure if she was tense or embarrassed by the rules, but she had no other choice. The guy was the first to touch the lady's shoulder and said that they were connected to each other by a magic circle. She again felt an incomprehensible warmth, which this time did not burn, but pleasantly spread throughout her body, so she closed her eyes. The demon said that he did not want to accept blood or flesh as payment, so he decided to share their warmth. But then Rudis stopped the deity and asked what would happen if she got close to him and accidentally made a mistake. The girl was afraid that she would not be able to cure her legs, but Lavaine gently hugged her around the waist, thereby comforting her. He whispered convincingly that as long as the lady was in his space, she had absolutely nothing to fear. After these words, looking around the place that was filled with light, the heroine decided to trust the assistant. So she let his hand touch hers, because she suddenly stopped worrying about anything. After making sure the girl was completely relaxed and not worried, Lavaine leaned down and kissed her forehead tenderly. Still very timid and uncertain, the lady hugged the guy with her hand, trembling with embarrassment, to make it more comfortable for her. She quickly kissed the demon back, as the rules required, but hoped that he enjoyed it in the end. However, the princess could not even imagine that in response, the deity would smile at her completely sincerely. Miss immediately blushed to the tips of her ears, although in fact she did not want to show such emotions. But Rudis was pleased that Lavaine was smiling so happily because of her, because the lady had never seen anything like this before. Despite the fact that tears were running down the princess's cheeks during their kisses, at that moment, she was absolutely happy. For the first time, the emperor's daughter realized what true intimacy was, and she loved the feeling. A few minutes after their kisses, the room in which Saintess and the emperor were located was illuminated by a bright light. A heroine appeared before the delighted heir of the Saintess family, for whom the guy was very worried. And the girl was able to successfully get her legs back with the help of Lavaine's powers, so she stood on them on her own. At the sight of his daughter, Barthold covered his face with his hands and bowed low, as he was deathly afraid of her now. But no matter how offended she was at Rudis's father, she only looked at him coldly and did not say a single word. Here, breaking the general silence, Sir jumped up from his seat and asked how the first princess was feeling. But as soon as he took a closer look, the guy froze in place because of the cold that blew from the girl's face. But the ruler's daughter herself did not notice her ally's reaction, since all her attention was focused on her father. Suddenly, without explaining anything to anyone, the girl asked her friends to leave this room that she hated. Saintess turned to the lady with concern, reminding her that she had been through too much to just leave. To this, Rudy stated with incredible confidence that the truth would not be hidden anyway, because she would not allow this to happen. The heir of the Saintess family was surprised at how much the girl had changed in just a few hours. When the whole company left the room, they were met by the emperor's personal secretary, who was waiting for him outside. The man was visibly shocked by what was happening, which made Rudy smile creepily as she looked at him. The assistant did not expect that the girl would understand so quickly that he was aware of all of his master's cruel plans. The first princess asked why the secretary was so surprised, since she could not harm her own father. The count guessed that he would not be able to resist the emperor's daughter in this fight, so he bowed and asked for forgiveness. However, he had no idea that Miss would then begin to give out instructions that he would have to follow. Rudy stated that the man would remain as quiet as possible the entire time she traveled to Ephedor. The princess hinted that she would not personally force the man to follow her words, although she did not advise him to neglect them. As a result, the secretary was left with essentially nothing, since his activities were limited for the next few days. But what was most surprised by everything that had happened was the cloaked figure who had been watching everything from the shadows. It was Giselle, who immediately ran to her mistress to tell her the terrible latest news. Lady Esther was somewhat busy at the time, but she still took the time to pay attention to her assistant, because she believed in her. Then the maid said that Rudis had walked out of the emperor's room on her own 2 feet, together with the deity. To this, Ivana replied that they did not need to worry about what had already happened and what could not be fixed. But the girl couldn't be so calm, because she knew that now their plan had completely gone down the drain. However, the woman said with a smile that she did not need to achieve the goal in this matter, because that was not the main thing. This information greatly surprised the assistant, and she immediately prepared to listen attentively further. It turned out that Esther initially wanted to pit Barthold and Rudis against each other, and she succeeded. The woman was sure that after what happened, the first princess would no longer stand silently on the sidelines. And right now, the lady could strike back powerfully because she was supported by all the inhabitants of the saved cities. As a result, Ivana planned that all members of the imperial family would simply kill each other, and she would take their place. After hearing this, Giselle reminded him that behind Rudis, there was a powerful ancient deity that could not be forgotten. To this, Esther said that she knew an excellent way to easily deal with the demon, so she was not afraid of him. Therefore, the woman only had to cunningly wait for the moment when the entire empire would become completely hers. No matter how calm the lady was, the assistant still had some doubts that her methods would lead to success. And at that moment, under the watchful eye of the guys, the doctor was examining the princess, who had recently suffered greatly. But, having quickly and skillfully examined the lady, the man concluded that she was fine, so he left. The girl sat in silence for a while, as she collected her thoughts and analyzed everything that was happening. She then turned her gaze to her friends and said that she wanted to tell them something very important right now. But before Rudis could say a few words, she suddenly realized with surprise that the boys were very sad. Lavigne, who had been silent since they left the room in the annex, looked especially serious and guilty. The heroine guessed that the demon and the Sir still blamed themselves for everything, although in fact they had done nothing wrong. However, Miss had to continue talking, so she said that it was not the Emperor who had arranged her kidnapping. Saintess couldn't help but react to this and cried out in surprise, since he hadn't thought about such a development of events. And the first princess suddenly declared that it was precisely another heir of Lady Ivana who planned the assassination attempt on her. Rudy's had no doubt that she was right in her guess, because there were many signs that pointed in that direction. The heroine explained that every time something strange happened, Esther was always somehow nearby. The lady guessed that the woman came out to her then, because she did not know that the princess had not yet lost consciousness. Imagine the princess's surprise when Lavaine suddenly announced that this was exactly what he had been thinking all along. When the emperor's daughter asked for more details, the demon continued to stand silently for some time. He finally reported that whoever had orchestrated the lady's abduction clearly understood the connection between man and deity. So the boy asked if Esther had any relation to such creatures, which made Saintess shudder slightly. Rudy's was the first to answer the assistant's question and said that she had personally never heard of anything like this before. Suddenly, the heir of the Saintess family quietly admitted that he had information on this matter. Sir felt extremely awkward talking about this topic, also because his father had passed this knowledge on to him as their personal secret. However, the guy said that Duke Saintess once went to Ivan's duchy, where he was shown the Alpha document. Until now, Saintess had a picture in his mind of Lavaine getting too close to the first princess. Knowing that the conversation was also about the relationship between the lady and the demon, the Sir doubted whether he should tell them the truth. But then the ancient deity could not stand it, and as politely as he could, asked the son of Saintess to tell him everything, which surprised him. When the guy confessed everything, it turned out that Lavaine had already heard about the existence of such a manuscript. He said that the book had previously been in chaos, and the lady immediately asked how it had ended up in the human world. To this, the demon replied that the author of Alpha had probably deliberately made it so that the book would eventually end up in the hands of people. The heroine had to believe these words, after which she asked what exactly the content of the document was. Lavaine explained that the manuscript contained almost all the information about the ancient divine beings from chaos. Only the assistant warned that with human knowledge, it was very difficult to decipher something like this. Unexpectedly for himself, Saintess lied and said that the book was taken apart by people only to the information about chaos. However, the demon did not doubt what was said. He only grinned and nodded, because this was good news for him. While the guys were talking to each other, Rudy sat silently between them and thought about her own things, because she didn't want to discuss anything. The first princess was interested in the fact that Alpha contained answers to all questions, but she did not know her past. But then Lavaine drew a conclusion about everything that had been said and reported that it was Ivana who now possessed this document. Rudy's nodded back at him, then stated that she would deal with Esther right after she helped the people of Ephedor. That same evening, the heroine asked the heir to find people who would closely monitor Lady Ivana. The guy nodded in agreement, although he was concerned about the lady's condition, and she asked what the situation was like in the palace. Sir reported that there was complete confusion there, but the emperor had not yet acted as the princess suspected. But she knew that Barthold wouldn't remain quiet after being scared, so they had to expect some kind of attack. Saintess asked with surprise why then the miss left his majesty alone, although she could have already dealt with him. Then it dawned on the heir that the lady had not touched Princess Selena either, which was also unnecessary. But, her face darkening, the girl reassured her ally, saying that she did not feel any affection for her family at all. At the moment, Rudy's was only doing nothing because she wanted to let the ruler rise and then bring him down to the very bottom. Such a bloodthirsty attitude greatly frightened the heir, but he tried not to show his emotions. And the emperor's daughter continued to talk about how she would have to deal with many aristocrats first. She intended to gradually and methodically remove the entire morally rotten part of the empire and then rule it herself. Herr Saintess had no idea that the lady was so determined in her desire to take revenge on the ruler. But he, without any doubt in his decision, knelt down before the miss and said that he would lead his knights after her. At this moment, Lavaine was walking alone around the outskirts of the Saintess estate when he suddenly felt something in his hand. The guy looked at her carefully and discovered that similar effects from his long stay in this world had begun. But at the moment, the demon couldn't afford to disappear back into chaos, so he quickly recovered. The deity knew that such methods could lead to consequences, but he still